So the big question is this: how do pastors like us who remain focused on the mission of Jesus and serving our communities without being distracted by everything in the world around us, how do we increase our effectiveness while living a lifestyle that doesn't compromise our health, our families, or our personal relationships with Jesus? That's the question this podcast is going to answer. I'm Dr. Brandon Party Cooper, and welcome to the Ministry Hackers Podcast. Welcome, everyone, to another episode of the Ministry Hackers Podcast. I hope you're doing well, and I hope you are enjoying your week. Today, I am joined by Mary Valloni, the author of the book, Fundraising Freedom. How's it going, Mary?
Hey, it's doing awesome. Thanks so much for having me on your show.
Yes, absolutely. I'm excited to have you on. Now, you just came off a vacation, correct?
Yeah, well, I don't know. I feel like I've been on vacation all year. Is that kind to say? No.
Right.
Yes. I mean, just back and forth with work, but yeah.
Nice. Very good. Very good. Now, so your book, Fundraising Freedom, when did it come out?
Yeah. So the book was released in 2017.
Okay.
And that was the same year that I also released my podcast, Fundraising Freedom, as well. So yeah, been a few years.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit about the book.
Yeah, so the book is basically for those of you who are familiar with Dave Ramsey and the whole financial peace university stuff. I was actually going through that whole process right before I put out my book, and I was like, you know what, fundraising should be as easy as Dave Ramsey's 7 steps. So I was like, fundraising just tends to get a lot of, there's always something that can be done. There's always a new fundraiser, something that should be taking your space and thoughts. And so I basically broke it down into a 7-step process to fundraise. And so I go through from your vision all the way through to you're making a difference and you've raised all the money, and now what? So each step of the process spells out the word, it's an acronym for the word freedom. And I just, in the book, go through each step of the process, giving somebody who's never really fundraised before a way and a process to do it that's really simplified and just easy for them to take action and see results.
Right. So now most of our community are pastors and ministry leaders. And so we often don't think of what we do as a fundraising effort. So help our listeners to understand the tie between, what we do on a Sunday morning, tithes and offering and missions and all of those things to, fundraising and how we think of fundraising.
Sure. Yeah. So fundraising, I especially in the ministry space, I do a lot of work with missionaries and ministries who like all those projects, all those things that you're working on that is maybe outside of tithes, because that's really your day-to-day operations that, those funds are coming in from people who are consistently giving. But the fundraising side of what I typically teach on is the above and beyond, the building campaign, we want to go build, dig wells in Africa, sex trafficking or, orphanages, any of that kind of stuff tends to be where people start thinking about what can we do to impact our community? How can we raise some funds and go above and beyond maybe just keeping our building afloat here. Right. So I do a lot of that stuff. And really when it comes to fundraising, I mean, if you're a nonprofit, which our churches are, right, you are responsible for keeping your doors open and doing that off of donations.
Right.
And so sometimes you have people who give a lot, some people who don't give very much, but there's also times where people get donations from people who, aren't even invested in their community at all, but right, like the pastor or like the mission of the organization and are willing to invest in that. A lot of the church planters and, people who are getting started, they see a lot of those funds coming in that way. And then once you do build out your base of your members, then you can start to bring in that consistent income. But yeah, I kind of fit into the like, hey, we're just getting started. And then, oh, wow, we're really successful. Like now we want to help other people. So, right, or you want to invest in that next church planter or that other ministry that you could be a part of. So, so I kind of hit on both sides of those, nice, that spectrum of fundraising.
Right. Yeah. So what would you say then for pastors, what's maybe the mind shift that they need to make in order to, kind of embrace, some of the principles you talk about in the book, but just how to, be more intentional about how they're bringing in those donations?
Sure. Well, I know a lot of pastors and ministry leaders who have a tendency to just live by faith which is fantastic. Like I'm all for that. But then they get into this time of year, October, November,
Right.
December, and then they're like in the red, and they're like, "Oh, dear Jesus, please help us." So,
Yep.
so my method of teaching is really to be more intentional about your support efforts, your support raising efforts, your fundraising, whatever you want to call it, but really looking at it as an entire calendar year, and not always, you know, fundraising as though everything's on fire. It's like, out of sight, out of mind. I just know that there's a lot of activities that are going on, and sometimes the money gets thrown to this wayside, and it's like, that's not as exciting as baptizing people and
Right.
leading people to the Lord. But this is such a critical component of what you do. So I really encourage people to stay focused on the overall goal that you're trying to raise and be intentional about that. Like, so right now, if you have the ability to be thinking about 2021, that's
Right.
where I would be. I'm as a fundraiser always looking at 18 months out. And I
Right.
know for some people it's like, gosh, that just seems so far away. And it's like, yeah, exactly. Because then you don't have to worry about, oh, are we going to have those
Yep.
funds or not? And then also when you're in the current year, you get to fundraise in the current year and in the next year. So you're giving people multiple options
Right.
on what to do. So there's so much to be thinking about when it comes to your finances. But I would just really, if you've been in that position where it's like you're always living in the day to day, that it's like, oh my gosh, hopefully God provides today.
Right.
This may be something that you can start to think about and say, you know what, I don't want to live that way anymore. I want to,
Right.
have an emergency fund. I want to be, spending the dollars that we raise today next year, not yesterday,
Right.
not
Right.
already have spent it in the
Right.
bank,
You're playing
so
catch up.
exactly. But all I have to say is that, that there's a plan, that there's a way to live differently. So if you have been in that phase, thankfully, Brandon is here to introduce you to another option, that you
Yeah.
don't have to live in that frantic space anymore. And
Right.
so, and how we do that is really just having this plan in place and bringing the right people together to come around you. So my secret to the sauce is all about your people.
Right.
I teach the primary thing that I teach, whether it's missionaries, church planters, pastors, is that you do exactly what Jesus did. I mean, he had his disciples, he had his people. And I don't think a lot of people realize, that, Andrew, who connected Jesus to Peter, was a networker. I mean, his goal was, he was just making that introduction. And so
Right.
a lot of times I think that we're like, oh, if they're not giving money financially, or if they're not necessarily, that they're not sitting in the pews, that somehow that person isn't as valuable to our ministry. And a lot of
Right.
times those networkers, those people who are great connectors, oh my gosh, they're so valuable. So
Right.
anyways, that we could go on another tangent, but just want to encourage people that, building out a team and getting some people around the table to talk about your finances and actually set up a plan is really going to be the best route to eliminate this frantic, on fire kind of feel that you might have with your finances.
Right. So then when you say begin thinking about 2021,
Yeah.
what are practical things that pastors can do now when they're thinking about 2021? Like what are they thinking about?
Yeah. So, okay, let's just take a special project, for instance. Like if they are looking to increase their funds for a particular area of the ministry, what I would actually do, and this is, the best example that I can give is when you are running a church, you have like your kids, pastor, you've got your youth minister, you've got maybe somebody who's looking at your college age, or singles, married, whatever. So you have all these people who are volunteering their time, looking at a specific area of your ministry in order for that ministry area to grow. So that's what I want to see in our ministries, is that they take that same principle, that same committee idea, and do that with their finances. So for 2021, I want to see a group of people actually coming together with the primary focus of, how do we increase our donations? How do we
Right.
increase our revenue for the ministry? And so when you start to bring people together under that one idea of like, hey, we want to go from here to here. We've got this one part of our ministry that we want to see that grow. Well, you start looking at those people and say, okay, we have 3 to 5 people who have shown a lot of interest in that particular area of the ministry. Let's get them together.
Right.
And let's create a plan. Like
Right.
let's have a strategy around,
Right.
how can we move it from X to X, and then empower those volunteers, empower those people to step up and create ways that we can generate new income to cover that project. So a mutual friend of ours, he's a pastor, and he did this. They had a refugee project, and he's like, we really want to see our refugee project increase. So he actually became a client of mine, and we worked together to increase their revenue around their refugee ministry.
Wow.
So he then we identified a key volunteer from the ministry who had shown a lot of interest in it, had volunteered a lot, and we gave them a title, came up with a fun name for the refugee ministry, and then we empowered them and created a whole volunteer team around them to increase revenue and to also make sure that that ministry was successful. So you can take that in any part, whether it's your general operating expenses or a special project, and you can do that very same thing. But
Right.
the only way that you're going to see success in 2021 is if you start planning for it,
Right.
now. You start thinking about it today and saying,
Yeah.
like, even if it's just mulling around some ideas in your head, like, oh, it would be really great if we increase this area. Some people are like, hey, I'd really like to see maybe tithes and offerings go up. Well, that's a specific area of the ministry that you're going to focus on. Well, let's bring together some people who actually tithe.
Right.
And we say, what caused you to say yes?
Hmm.
And now we're starting to create language and utilize the volunteers who are doing exactly what you want everybody else to do,
Right.
and give them the platform to say, hey, we've had some rough times. We've gone through highs and lows, but they can speak to why did they continue to tithe, or
Right.
why did they choose to, what's in their DNA that caused them to do that, and give them the platform to be able to speak in. Because I know a lot of pastors have a difficult time asking for people to step up their game, because it's like, well, of course you're tithing, this is your income, or
Right.
you started this church and this is your baby. So that's where I think that people forget that it's like, well, instead of you saying it all the time, why don't we empower a few other people so that
Right.
they can say it instead. So
Right.
yeah.
Well, and what I like about that is it also, a lot of pastors and ministry leaders, they want to start new ministries, or they see a need in the community and they want to go after that. But then it always comes down to, well, we don't have the budget for that, or we're not able, we can't allocate what we have, we can't take more pieces out of the pie that we have. And so what you're saying though is, okay, well, if we're wanting to move in that direction, well, how do we champion that and get people behind giving towards it? So we're not taking another piece from the pie, we're making the pie bigger.
Exactly.
So
And just like with the example that I used with your, kids, youth, high school, whatever, middle school, you're not taking away from, like, if
right.
we start a high school ministry, we're not taking away from the kids.
Right.
It's just we're encouraging some people to put some emphasis there and build out that program. So, and that's really the only way that our churches and our ministries are going to grow, is if we layer on top. So if you've got your foundational funds coming in, fantastic.
Right.
Let's layer up on that. So let's maybe your board of directors or whatever is focused on your general operating expenses, and then, or your revenue. And
Right.
then we start to build out teams that are looking at other projects and other areas that we can grow.
Right.
And I like doing it that way, because then it's like, well, if they succeed, awesome. Like, yay, more money for that ministry.
Right.
But if they don't do so great, like, oh, well, like
Yeah.
that wasn't
Right.
no loss.
Yeah.
And you're not hiring staff to do it. You're
Right.
building out, these are all volunteers willing to step up and say, you know what, I'd love to see that ministry grow. I'd love to see this area, and that's why when people are like, oh, it'd be great if we had that playground. It's like, well, go grab 3 to 5 people and say,
Right.
hey, you want the playground? Let's go. Let's make that happen.
Right.
So there's no reason why it's going to shut down or shut off your giving in
Right.
other areas. So anyway,
Right.
and I
Yeah,
know
that's good though.
I know that you're pooling, like you're coming from just this one pool of people. And I think that that's where you feel like, oh, I don't want to like ask our people to go above and beyond, or, hey, they're already tithing here. And then we set up this committee and now they're going to be asking from the same group.
Right.
I just want you to realize that they don't necessarily have to pull from inside of your ministry.
Right.
You are a nonprofit. So that pastor that I mentioned who put an emphasis on refugees, his emphasis was not just inside the church. It was who's partnering on this refugee project. And he partnered with multiple churches on
Right.
it,
Hmm.
multiple areas, just individuals from the community who also cared about that same project. So that's where I just want people to start thinking outside of the box, that they don't have
Right.
to be your Sunday, attendees in order to give to a project or give to your ministry in
Right.
some way.
Well, and one thing what we're seeing just across the board, especially as as millennials are kind of moving more into, families and higher earnings and all of those things, is they're very cause oriented. And so though they may be, faithful in their ties, off of
Yeah.
their paycheck, they're looking for causes to be a part of. And a lot of times they're going outside of the church to partner with other causes because the church isn't offering anything. And so, a lot of times if churches are, if they are having, like you said, an initiative for refugees or something like that, well, a lot of them are looking for a cause to be a part of. As churches, we're just not giving them an option. And so they're going elsewhere looking for them.
Yeah. Well, when I moved to St. Louis, basically that was exactly what was happening. I was looking for a church that was more than just a church. I mean,
Right.
like, and I know that sounds bad, but it's like, but I wanted to be a part of something bigger in my community than sitting in a pew every week. So the church that I ended up getting plugged into, and it was beautiful because it was right in my community, but they were focused on the racial divide of our city. And if anybody knows anything about what's going on, around the world, but especially in St. Louis, I mean, we got hit with all the Ferguson stuff, but that
Yeah.
actually happened after I joined my church. And it was just really interesting because I'm like, we were having those dialogues of, why are we dealing with this? But every single person that I talked to in that church and said, how did you find this church? Or how did you get plugged in here? And they're like, I wanted to be a part of a racially diverse church. I mean, like,
Right.
I wanted to be a part of the solution, not a part of the problem.
Right.
So it was beautiful. But everybody has, I'm sure every pastor kind of has that like idea of what are we going to do that's better or different
Mhm.
than the church down the street? And why are people going to attend here instead of there? And so just being a church and just being available is, sadly not good enough anymore,
Right.
to draw people, and especially this younger generation that's
Mhm.
looking for more,
Right.
and there's a lot of topics that really turn them off. So it's like, but relationship, if we've learned anything, is that, community and being a part of something bigger than ourselves will forever, withstand the test of time. Like
Right.
we need community and we need each other. So yeah.
Right. Yeah. So good. So in the book, you talk about, everybody who's raising funds. So for our context, pastors and ministry leaders, it's important to become like Sherlock Holmes.
Yeah.
And so kind of unpack that for, our pastors and ministry leaders. What is that? What do you mean by that? How do we become like Sherlock Holmes to raise our funds?
Yeah. So in the book, my mentor who taught me how to fundraise, he used this analogy and said, be like Sherlock Holmes. You can draw broad observations off of minute details. So when you go on somebody's social media, whether that's Facebook or Instagram or wherever, you can draw broad observations off of these little things that they say or they do. And that's where when I get somebody who messages me about supporting their missions, whatever that is, whether it's a mission trip or whether it's a ministry, and they just send me a message saying, hey, we're raising support for X. I'd love to have a conversation with you. And I'm immediately like, have you not looked at my Facebook page? Like it was like, like it would have taken them 2 seconds to be like, oh, you help, ministries and mission. And it says right on my page, I help ministries raise money. And so, but they don't take that extra step to look at what's going on in my life, what's going on in my world, and where can I actually step up? So how this would be utilized for pastors and ministry leaders is if you are looking to move somebody into a leadership position, say that you want to create some sort of group, like I just mentioned, for a project that you're trying to raise funds in. If you take just a few minutes
Right.
to go cyber stalk them.
Which is so easy these days.
It is so easy. It's so different than before where it's like you'd have to be like, hey, have you talked to so-and-so and what's going
Right.
on in their lives? Like now people are saying, oh my gosh, I just lost a loved one to whatever, or hey, we just went on vacation or we just did this or did that. And so you have an immediate way to build a conversation off of. But I just often want to just encourage people that it's like, just take a few extra minutes to find out what are they showing an interest in, and
Right.
how does that correlate to the kind of role that you're looking to get them plugged into, or maybe just even attending your church if you're just trying to invite them to come. That's really important. So so research to me is like, that's what alleviates all the anxiety and
Right.
everything that comes with asking people for money, is that when you do your research, you can come in super confident about the conversation. If I'm talking to a pastor and, I want him to support maybe a ministry, a project or a missions focus that maybe I'm working on somewhere else, I'm going to come in and I'm already going to know that these projects align with what you already care about.
Right.
You've shown it on all of your media stuff, and it makes total sense that we partner together. So by the
Right.
time we're having a conversation, it's like, how do we not know each other? we,
Right.
we should know each other. We should be in partnership on this, and so it's never about the money at that point. It's all about, this is your vision, this is my vision. Let's get together on this and let's see how we can help more people.
Right. Yeah. That's so good. So, as you mentioned earlier, there we have some pastors who are listening who they're in, October of 2020,
Yeah.
and they're in the red, and they're trying to figure out, they're not worried about 2021. They're worried about how do they make it through 2020. And so what's some practical advice you can give them, just looking at, we have 2.5 months left. What can they do to kind of maybe either close the gap of red or maybe even get into the black by the end of the year?
Absolutely. Okay. And this is a great question. I actually just did a podcast episode on this. So if you want more, you can listen to my podcast episode on it. But the whole thing is you got to start with the end in mind. So what are you trying to do? So if we're looking at 2020 and we need to end out the calendar year, in the black, then we've got to look at, okay, December 31st, what are we going to do in the next roughly, under 90 days. I mean,
Right.
when we're recording this, I mean, we're just shy of 90 days.
Right.
So what we're going to do is we're just going to work our way backwards from this. So I really share the freedom process. Those 7 steps is, we start with the vision. Focus your vision. What's the end in mind? So let's just say we're trying to raise $10, $20, $30,000, whatever that amount is. We get that number nailed down. Then we do our Sherlock Holmes research and we're like, okay, how are we going to come up with that money? And we start just brainstorming, looking at, hey, what have we done in the past? What's worked for us before? And look at our history. Maybe you don't have any history. Totally fine. That's maybe all the research you can do.
Right.
And then we bring people together. So
Good.
then we bring together the 3 to 5 people who can help move towards that mission. So for some people, it's they bring their board together. Some people, it's like, hey, we need some new energy. We need some new excitement. I can't go back to the board or the elders or whatever because we're going to get the same story, different day.
Right.
So instead, we're going to get some fired up entrepreneurial people who, don't know how to fail.
Right.
Like they touch something and it just turns to gold.
Right.
Those are the kinds of people I'm bringing together. So with all of this, I don't see any problem with trying to raise. I mean, like, there is no reason why you shouldn't be able to raise whatever dollar amount that you're looking for in a certain time frame. Obviously, it needs to be, actually attainable,
Right.
that it's not like crazy talk here. But we also know that God works in crazy ways. So like,
Right.
I sometimes I'm like, even when the number seems outrageous, it's like, well, if he gave you a number, you got to just go with it. So sometimes that number is like, okay, I guess we're supposed to ask for that. But if you just for a second think about different dollar amounts. So if I were to, just say $1,000 to you, okay, you think of $1,000 and it's like, okay, I can visually see what $1,000 looks like.
Mhm.
If I then say $10,000, okay, that's a little bit more money. All right, I get a different feel, a
Yeah.
completely different feel for that 10 grand. Now I'm going to say 100,000. Now we're talking about property. We're talking about, it's a significant amount of money. This is exactly how fundraising works.
Mhm.
Is that we have these big numbers in mind, maybe the 10 or the 100,000 or even maybe 1,000,000 for some of the churches that are listening. And you're trying to get the same people who are fundraising $1,000
Right.
on your $1,000,000 campaign.
Yeah.
That is ridiculous.
Right.
So that's where, for wherever you're at, however much money you have that needs to be raised, that you want to raise, maybe you got that dream project, that dream building, whatever it is, the best advice I can give to you is just take a step back, build the foundation from the ground up. I often say that I'm like, my husband and I just built a new home, and I'm like, we would never have slapped this house on the foundation of the house that we lived in prior to this. Like, it would be the most awkward looking home, like toppling over on this awkward, base underneath that could not sustain it.
Right.
And that's what I think a lot of our ministries are doing, is that it's like, oh, I've got this huge God-sized vision, or, hey, we have grown over the years, and it's just, we never anticipated that we would be where we are today. But go back to the foundational elements of who's actually a part of these conversations, who's a part of these decision-making, opportunities, and build your dream off of that. So that's where I'm just like, don't just get the same old people sitting at the table. We got new people coming in all the time, and new people who are moving into our communities. They're looking to get plugged in.
Mm-hmm.
They don't know what you've done in the past. They don't know the history. They don't know the drama.
And often they don't care.
And they don't care. They're just like, we want to make a difference and we want to change lives. So that's where I just want to encourage people to just don't feel like you're going to be leaving somebody out if you start a project, or if you're thinking about this year-end amount that you're trying to raise. Don't feel like you have to go back to the ones that have been your Debbie Downers or whatever, and say, well, that's not possible, or where are we going to come up with that kind of money? It's like, yep, those are the people not in this group. Like, don't invite those people
to talk to you.
Yes.
Right.
We're looking at big vision people who are like, they don't know how to fail. Those are the guys I'm looking for.
Now, you have an experience that you've created specifically for pastors called the Fully Funded Academy. So tell us a little bit about that.
Sure. Yeah. So Fully Funded Academy, just a few years ago, I connected with actually at a conference that you and I met at. I met my business partner, Mike Kim, and he's a former worship pastor. And I came up through college ministry, and the two of us are just so super passionate about ministries and missionaries. And so we started this program called Fully Funded Academy, and it really is, we just want to make it as simple as possible, cost effective, easy for people to learn no matter what part of the world that they live in. Because as you know, missionaries are, in different parts of the world. Like, third world countries, they may or may not have a ton of access to resources. So this is where you can learn, and you can binge watch videos like Netflix, and you can consume as much as you want, or you can go at your own pace. But regardless, a Fully Funded Academy, we've got hundreds of church planters, ministries that are in this. Mm-hmm. And we are seeing people who've really struggled with their fundraising for a long time finally figure out how to raise money. Wow. And it is like the most beautiful thing ever, because I just think that in the ministry space, there has been so much poverty and just that lack and scarcity mindset that has crept in, that it's like, oh, if you love Jesus, you should live on little to nothing. And it's like, when I start to, talk with these ministries that have gone through our program, and it's really just the steps that I talk about here. I do videos for each one. I give, all the downloads that you need. And then my friend Mike, he's an amazing writer. And so he's written those support raising letters for you. He wrote letters for, COVID, because it was like, oh, great, what am I going to say now? And it's like, but he's done all the hard work of writing. So you just got to dump in your information and modify what has already been done, which is way easier than starting from scratch. But these guys, once they've come in here, it's just been really incredible to see how God has just worked through maybe some things in their past, where they were told that maybe you shouldn't be a pastor, or maybe you shouldn't start this ministry, and all those things that kind of knocked you down over the years, and you don't even realize that you have lying underneath all that. And I know we all have our own history with money. Maybe you had a lot of money, maybe you didn't have any money. And so we just all respond to finances in a different way. So Fully Funded Academy is just, right now the cost to join is $49 a month. Mm-hmm. So just really inexpensive. People can stay for as long as they want, or, they can come in for a month, they can come in for, years. We have had some people who never have left, because they're like, it's just nice to have a reminder, and also to have a positive inclusive community of people who
Exactly.
are not afraid to talk about money.
Right.
So that's just really obviously an uplifting group of
Good.
people who just, they all love Jesus and they all want to, change lives and plant and just make a difference in the world. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, and especially now, I mean, this has been such a difficult year for so many people, but I think for pastors specifically, like this has been challenging. And so to be a part of a community that's encouraging and uplifting and, not debating and struggling and frustrated and mad about everything, but really helping each other out, especially in an area of like finances where, it's a touchy subject for some and difficult to navigate for others. And so to have a community that can come together and really help each other grow because it's all kingdom work, but
Right.
even kingdom work takes money. So, it's just good to have that community around that. So now
Yeah.
you and I are a part of a community. You published your book with Author Academy Elite.
Yep.
And so just tell everybody kind of how did Author Academy Elite help you take your idea of a book and bring it into reality?
Yeah, I love how we actually met because I had posted, we were at this Barnes and Noble, the largest Barnes and Noble book signing.
Right.
And here I posted on social media. I did just like a Facebook Live, and one of our mutual friends was like, "Oh, you need to know Brandon." And like literally, I scoped out the entire, I'm on the second floor of Barnes and Noble looking down, trying to find Brandon. So I'm on your Facebook looking at your picture. And that's what I love about being in community with each other. And I actually created Fully Funded Academy because I wanted to replicate what we had in Author Academy Elite,
Mhm.
So, but yeah, that program was absolutely incredible for me because here I was, like a Christian who wanted to write a book, yes, but like I was never looking at that faith-based space.
Right.
And as soon as I joined Author Academy Elite, it was through a mutual pastor friend who connected me to Carrie Oberbrunner. I watched a webinar, and next thing I knew, I was like, I knew, like, when you know you're supposed to write a book.
Right.
I don't consider myself a writer. I love doing stuff more like this. We're having a conversation. I just love people.
Mhm.
So writing was actually fairly difficult for me. And so being in community with like-minded people who were all like, they were all going through the same thing. So one of my dear friends that started at the same time as me, we both launched our books at the same time. So I got to promote his book. He promoted mine. And it was just really fun. And I honestly created, lifelong friendships through
Right.
the program, you included. And so it's like, it just really a great community. But yeah, I had this idea and I knew I wanted to write the book, but that program actually helped me a ton with just really putting language to what I was trying to create. And even
Mhm.
these 7 steps, I'm like, oh, I know I kind of need an acronym, but what does that look like? And
Right.
so, yeah, Carrie really helped me work through each one of those steps and giving it language. So,
Yeah.
yeah, I loved every second of it. It's sad to me. Like, this is normally, I mean, a year ago
Yeah.
is when we connected. And so it's sad that we won't be there live this
Yeah.
year,
I know.
unfortunately, but we'll find each other this
Yeah.
way, right?
Exactly. Yeah, it's been, it's such a great community of, and not just authors of entrepreneurs and business people that just are constantly encouraging. Yeah, it's funny because I think about that a lot, how we met because for those who don't know, I am generally shy person. Like I'm not a super outgoing, like come into a crowd and like take over the room. I just kind of hang back and chill. And so Mary comes up and she says, "Are you Brandon Party Cooper?" And I was like, yeah. I didn't know what that, like, where are we going with this? And then, you mentioned that you knew, a mutual friend of ours. And then it's just a good connection that probably would not have happened, had we not been in the same place and had he not seen your video. And so it's just connecting and for our ministry hacker community, a lot of pastors serve in such isolation and are away from people. So, not people as far as a congregation, but away from people as far as other ministry leaders. And so, our relationship and what we have done and what we're both building, whether it's through the Fully Funded Academy or through Ministry Hackers, it's all about creating communities where people can get together and feel supported and encouraged and challenged and, just help us do whatever God's called us to do. And so yeah, so it's been a great experience, just for AAE and to connect with you. As we wrap up, Mary, you've shared so many good things for us here in this episode. What is one ministry hack that you could leave for all of our listeners and watchers? What's the one thing that you could say, if you did this, it would just change everything or revolutionize everything or make everything simpler, what's the one thing you would leave with them?
Yeah, so you and I know, and everybody who's listening knows that the reason why our churches are successful, the reason why our ministry is successful is relationships.
Mhm.
And the only way that you're going to maintain a relationship is through communication.
Right.
And so churches obviously are 30% of all money that's donated, over 30% is given to religious organizations.
Wow.
And the reason for that is because of this
Wow.
relationship. Our pastors get to be in the lives of these people. I mean, no charity can compete with that.
Right.
So, like, I mean, I worked for the American Cancer Society, Special Olympics, the ALS Association. Like, those organizations can't compete with the local church ever.
Right.
Because they are not in their ear. They're not doing small groups. They're not, seeing them every single week. And our churches do. And so my hack is that I'm like, the more you communicate, the better.
Yeah.
And I think that that's where sometimes we kind of freeze a little bit about, oh, well, we don't want to ask for money or we don't want to ask for resources or time. And that's where we go wrong, is that it's like when you're in relationship with somebody, you can ask in the good times and you can ask in the bad.
Right.
And so my example that I like to use is if my car breaks down on the side of the road, who am I going to call?
Yeah.
I'm going to call my husband. I'm going to call my best friend. I'm going to call somebody who I can trust, who's going to come pick me up.
Yep.
And as soon as I call my husband, he's going to say, "You stay there. I'm coming for you," or "The tow truck is on its way and I'm coming for you." Now, this isn't, it costs them money. It costs them time to do that. But when you're in relationship with people, they're going to be like, "Where are you? We're coming to get you."
Right.
And I think that when you're in a tough situation, and maybe that's where you're at right now in 2020, is that, times are not easy. This is hard.
Right.
But if you've built those relationships and you've actually communicated frequently with your people about good and bad, they will be there for you. So don't be afraid. I'm just going to say, don't be afraid to ask for help.
Yeah.
And that's where we do sometimes feel like, well, I don't want to be that person. It's like, yeah, but you have been there for them.
Yeah.
And you have shown up in their lives over and over. You're there with the casserole. You're there with the prayers. Like when you need help, you have to just speak up. And that's where you don't have to do it from the pulpit. You can do it in this conversation with 3 to 5 people and just bring them together and say, "Hey guys, I brought you together because we really need to talk about something that's been weighing on my heart," and just start with them and then move forward. So, but communication is absolutely key. Is nobody can help you if they don't know you need help.
Exactly.
So ask for help if you need it.
Yeah.
So
That's good.
yeah.
That's good. Well, if you are interested in checking more out from Mary, you can do that at maryvalloni.com. And on there, you can find the Fully Funded Academy, or you can just go to fullyfundedacademy.com and check that out and be a part of that community. So thank you so much, Mary, for being a part of this episode with us.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me. And I wish everyone who's listening just only the best of luck in 2020 and just praying for you guys in your ministries.
Good. Well, thank you. Well, thank you everyone for joining us for this episode. I will see you in the next one.